listener production.
Hey, Chris Spyrou with you. Happy Friday and welcome to The Briefing. Insta-perfect pics, loud music, and a whole lot of sweaty abs. Welcome to the world of HYROX.
I think cult-like following is a completely fair comment. It's kind of crazy. So the first ever event was started by two German guys. And they had 600 competitors. Fast forward now, only 6 or 7 years, and there was 21,000 in Sydney over the weekend.
That deep dive into Australia's latest fitness obsession is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Tara Cassidy. It's Friday, the 11th of July.
Hey Chris, and to you listening, red flags are being raised over a new plan put forward by the federal government's advisor on antisemitism, with some critics labelling it draconian and a blueprint for silencing dissent. Special Envoy Gillian Segal handed down the sweeping proposals yesterday, which included a call to strip funding from universities, charities and broadcasters that fail to combat hatred against Jewish people.
In the space of just 1 year, reported incidents increased over 300%. And that includes threats, vandalism, harassment, and physical violence. The plan today builds on a foundation of actions. And I'm sure that with collective action, anti-Semitism can and will be successfully confronted.
The landmark report recommends adding anti-Semitism and Holocaust education into the national curriculum while pushing the government to hold mainstream news and social media giants accountable and deport visitors spreading hate.
The government, as well as the coalition, has welcomed the review. No commitment has been made on any of the 49 recommendations just yet. While the plan has been backed by some peak groups like the Executive Council of Australian Jewry and the Zionist Federation of Australia, it has been criticised by the Jewish Council of Australia, whose executive officer Max Kaiser told SBS the plan is misguided and far-reaching.
I mean, this is straight out of the Trump playbook. There are serious issues with anti-Semitism in Australian society, but they can't be dealt with in isolation. They have to be dealt with as part of much broader efforts to tackle racism as a whole in Australian society.
Yeah, and that's a point that's also been made by the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network. They've essentially warned that the way that anti-Semitism sometimes is interpreted could mean that any sort of criticism of Israel would fall into this basket and then, would enact all these different powers. So where the government stands on this, they have said that they welcome it, but it'll be very, very interesting to see which of the 49 recommendations they do adopt, if any.
Two former New South Wales police officers who violently assaulted a mentally ill woman during an arrest will learn their fate next week after pleading guilty to the attack. 30-year-old Timothy John Trouch and 28-year-old Nathan Black were working in Western Sydney when they received calls about a 48-year-old woman who'd been released from a correctional facility earlier that day. The woman had schizophrenia and wasn't medicated at the time.
Yesterday, the Penrith District Court heard when the men arrived and attempted to arrest her. She yelled abuse at them, telling them not to touch her and to F off. The men then dragged her by her hair along the road and repeatedly stomped and capsicum sprayed her, including on her face and genitals, before one of the officers says, "That's enough, there could be cameras." Ambulance staff that treated the woman later raised the alarm about her condition.
Yeah, and the court also heard that Nathan Black went on to then send snippets of the body cam vision to a colleague saying she was effed, the whole body worn is so good, shows her being effed. Now, that woman later died of reasons unrelated to the assault, and an internal investigation was launched by the New South Wales Police Force, but both men resigned in August 2023 and their sentence is now expected to be handed down next week.
The number of deaths from hanging points in Australian correction facilities has risen despite countless recommendations for their removal spanning decades. According to The Guardian, there's been 248 hanging deaths in our jails, with 57 of them from known ligature points, which authorities have been repeatedly told to remove by coroners at various inquests. Over 30 years ago, the removal of hanging points in prisons was also recommended during a royal commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody.
Yeah, and Brisbane's Arthur Gorrie prison has some of the highest rates of suicide using exposed bars, which 10 prisoners have actually used to kill themselves, and yet the bars remain in place. And other prisons that have also recorded similar deaths include Sydney's Long Bay, Melbourne's Port Phillip Prison, South Australia's Remand Centre, WA's Hakea Prison, and multiple in New South Wales, yet such points have never been removed.
The Federal Attorney General says the findings are deeply concerning and unacceptable. She says she'll be discussing the issue with state and territory politicians who are responsible for these facilities.
Yeah, and look, I always dislike that word discussing because we'll be talking of this, but never actually promising to make something happen, because this kind of issue happens time and time again, whether it be suicides in correctional centres, domestic and family violence homicides. There's always these countless recommendations made by coroners at these inquests, and they spend weeks dissecting these cases, bringing witnesses, experts in to kind of figure out what went wrong and what led to the deaths so that they never happen again. Politicians then promise they'll do something, yet very little or none of those recommendations are then enforced, and we'll go on to see the same death in the exact same way 6 months later, a year later, 5 years later. And I've seen the exact same thing with DV murders over the last 8-9 years, and it's really disheartening. It just shows that there's obviously something missing and not working in this justice system process that the public would expect.
Australia's eSafety Commissioner is continuing her fight to have YouTube included in our world-first social media ban for kids under the age of 16, overnight releasing research showing it's the most used platform by kids and where they're most exposed to harmful content.
Ah, shock horror.
Surprise, surprise.
Exactly my feeling.
Yes. She'd been under pressure from the Coalition and Sky News to release the data she first cited in her National Press Club speech last month, and did so last night.
Yeah, and on top of showing that, 3 in 4 Aussie kids use the platform and 1 in 3 have encountered potentially harmful content, the research also found that kids aged 10 to 12 are 20% more likely to be exposed over teens. And interestingly, it also dug into the types of harm experienced on social media platforms, and it found that issues like image-based abuse, grooming and sexual harassment are more likely to occur on places like Snapchat over the Google-owned video site. But as we said, obviously there is still harmful content on there that they are finding, Chris. That's no surprise to me.
Yeah, no surprise at all. And of course, Snapchat is part of the social media ban, which makes perfect sense. It's interesting, though, we've kind of seen this space evolve because now we have not just YouTube lobbying the Labor government, the Albanese government, we also have YouTube creators lobbying the government. And for good reason. I mean, I've worked in digital media for a while and on this platform specifically, on YouTube specifically, and not having kids watching your content means that you lose a huge chunk of your market. That affects sponsorship deals. It affects the revenue that you can raise on the platform. I know I'm talking purely commercial at the moment, but I understand why the creators are lobbying the government. The ones that have been quoted by multiple outlets aren't the problematic ones that the Safety Commissioner is clearly targeting.
Big W has reportedly pulled the renowned red Make America Great Again hats from its websites in Australia after public backlash from those questioning the political movement, saying the hats are aligned with hate, even the far right. Now, the baseball caps were being sold in their party costume section, Chris, and listed by a third party, with Big W's parent company Woolworths reportedly confirming they've since been removed following the heated response. And Chris, I don't know, what do you think about this? I mean, these hats are widely available. You can purchase them online from other Australian retailers. It's in the costume section. I mean, it's a hat that's attached to a legitimate political party. Is it fair to remove them because some choose to wear them in the wrong way, or because they've aligned their own message to it, or because you disagree with Trump's policies and actions? Like, I'm trying to compare it if it was Albo or Dutton hats going around, and obviously both politicians that many people dislike or disagree with their policies, but would we stop those people buying or wearing a hat that supports them? Or, I don't know, are the MAGA hats just too strongly aligned with hate now that it sends the wrong message?
I mean, first and foremost, if you're wearing an Albo or Dutton hat, wow, like get some friends. No, okay, that's maybe a bit too harsh, but come on, who's buying political hats in Australia? Look, seeing these MAGA hats around Australia to me is such a weird thing to witness anyway, but the context in which I do see it, there are two contexts. It's either at a really fun party or this stupid thing where someone's fake tanned themselves to the shit house and they're trying to impersonate Trump. And then the flip side is where we have some instances where people wear the hat just to rile up the public. So, I mean, look, Big W, I mean, sure, they've made a call. They're responding to backlash. At the end of the day, they got to do, I guess, what they think is right for business. But I just want to dig into something that you, our listeners, gave us this week, because we did talk about Trump a lot this week, as we do most weeks, but he was mostly in the headlines because of the Epstein files, these alleged Epstein files. Now, look, the US government has come out to say that there isn't a climate client list. And obviously, that is something that the Trump administration is denying. There is no Jeffrey Epstein client list. But we wanted to know whether you briefers bought into that narrative, and 90% of you think he is on that list.
Yeah, a resounding yes from you guys. Meanwhile, we also asked you about the Aldi home delivery, which is starting soon. That was a big heck yes from me. I can't wait. But we asked you guys in our broadcast channel, and majority of you gave it the big tick of approval. Again, more than 90% of you want to give it a crack.
Yes, very strong stats. But I did read that the Aldi special buys will not form part of the DoorDash partnership, Tara Cassidy.
Outrageous.
No
I can't get a TV delivered to my house.
And no lawnmowers, damn it. It's an injustice. Look, that brings our headlines to a close for today. Next up is my deep dive, looking into the world of HYROX, the new world of endurance racing that is sweeping the world and parts of Australia. Stick around, that deep dive is coming up for you next. Would you pay $25 to watch everyday Aussies grind through an indoor endurance race? You might not, but tens of thousands actually do. In fact, they've been doing it right across the globe for years, cheering on the world's hybrid rock stars, or HYROX. The indoor fitness comp, born in Germany in 2017, landed here 2 years ago and currently sits on Time magazine's top 100 most influential companies list. HYROX has 83 events on this year's calendar, many already run, stretching everywhere from Abu Dhabi to Cape Town and closer to home in cities like Brisbane, Melbourne, and most recently Sydney, where 21,000 hybrid rock stars showed up across 3 days, making it the biggest HYROX event ever run. Former journo and self-described mid-hybrid rock star Joseph Ogilvie took on the Sydney course last weekend. Joe, welcome to the briefing. What pulled you in and what did the race actually involve?
Why did I do it? I guess it was something to work towards to achieve something. And in terms of what we had to do, in a nutshell, HYROX is an exercise competition. So it's 8 1-kilometre efforts with 8 workout stations between each run. So what people might be familiar with, obviously running is pretty straightforward, and then they might know a rowing machine in the gym. It's 1 kilometre of running followed by 1 kilometre of a rowing machine. Other exercises, for example, in my category, a sled push is in between as well. It's 152 kilos on that sled and you've got to push it for 50 metres and then keep running. So as you can appreciate, it's reasonably tiring, but also kind of fun.
Yeah, look, as someone who recently cancelled their gym membership, I am very, sympathetic to your cause, but will never be one taking part in this. I am curious to know, though, what's the end goal, or what is the point of the race? Is it, is there prize money at the end? Is it a ranking? Is it just personal achievement?
I think it's a really broad spectrum in terms of the purpose of it. So certainly at that top end, high elite level, there is prize money involved. If we look at the World Championship, $30,000 for winning a race, plus sponsorships, etc. Then you've got a lot of people like myself. I consider myself a very mid-type operator, where you're really trying to get that sense of achievement, train towards something and really finish the race, and hopefully do that in a reasonably good time. And then equally, I think for every sort of shirtless, rigged up influencer you see who's out there smashing it, there's potentially a mother on the course who's given birth a year ago and has set a goal of finishing the race. I even saw an article as early as this morning. Someone apparently rocked up on the weekend, zero training, had just done some running and completed the event. So it's a really broad spectrum of competitors.
Based on what I've read and understood about it, most people can get it done within an hour to 2 hours, the average kind of person. Zooming out, though, HYROX itself isn't just about the race or global competition, is it?
I guess from my own experience, I'd normally do about a 3-month training block leading into an event. I do all that myself, but you've also got things like F45. They sponsored the event in Sydney, for example. And what they do is, they give you things like pre-sale events, programs, all of these things that people can train towards and work towards.
I've heard the expression HYROX gyms be thrown around, which was something I didn't know existed. What is a HYROX gym?
So in Australia, it probably hasn't developed quite as much as what you might see in the UK and parts of Europe. But essentially a HYROX gym here, you'll go in, you'll have a 3-month program you're working towards with really targeted exercise. So you might be doing, sleds into runs, you might be doing squats into runs, things like that, or it's a really targeted sort of program. But the sponsorship and kind of partnership arrangement that we're seeing is really expanding massively. I had a quick look yesterday. In the US, there's actually a health insurance provider that's sponsoring the events. It's, I think it's like Sigma Health or something like that.
Oh, wow.
We've got sports retailers in Europe sponsoring, like Intersport. I think they're here as well. So it's kind of expanding that partnership model. That seems to be the next phase of what they're doing.
So you mentioned Intersport there, which exists in some form in Australia, but it is incredibly popular in Europe. It's kind of like Europe's version of Rebel Sport. You've also mentioned F45. What do you think's in it for these brands to partner with something like HYROX?
I think it's almost as obvious as what the business is, right? So for Intersport, they're probably trying to sell equipment to the people competing. For F45, they're trying to get more people into their gyms. For their health insurance provider in the US, they're probably thinking it's great from a brand and reputational perspective to be linked with, this really healthy lifestyle and approach. So I think it's almost as obvious as what the brand wants and accessing that particular group of people, which, as we saw in Sydney on the weekend, is really growing and at this point quite large.
And it's interesting there because F45, up until recently, the way we were talking about it, the way economists were talking about it, is that it was on the brink of collapse. And now it's, front and center in everyone's Insta feeds and faces because of that HYROX affiliation. Another group of people that HYROX has tapped into are these HYROX ambassadors. What do you know about them?
I think they're a really varied group. So certainly some of them are your pretty typical fitness influencers you might see. But equally, I think here in Australia, there's a guy by the name of Dexter Buchanan, who is one of the very elite pros in Australia. He's one of the ambassadors. And so, he's that really top level, super fit guy. But equally, there are also some ambassadors that are maybe a little bit closer to someone like myself, where they've got more of that holistic lifestyle approach. They're healthy, they're training, but maybe not to that obsessive elite level that we're seeing.
What's behind that growing, dare I say, cult-like following?
I think cult-like following is a completely fair comment. It's kind of crazy. So the history of it is the first ever event was started by 2 German guys. And they had 600 competitors. Fast forward now, only 6 or 7 years. And there was 21,000 in Sydney over the weekend. That's just Sydney. Worldwide, it's more than 500,000 people competing, another couple 100,000 spectators. So it's kind of, from what I can understand, it's doubled every year since it started. In terms of why that is, look, this might sound like a crazy comparison, but I walked away from the weekend and was kind of like, you know what? This reminded me of going to a music festival when I was a fair bit younger. I walked in, the music is like absolutely pumping. There's people everywhere. The kind of atmosphere is really high. And the next day I woke up feeling pretty rough, pretty sore, kind of like when I used to go to music festivals. So, maybe it's not quite as exciting as seeing 10 or 12 bands in a day. But, I know when Dom Dollar was pumping in the second last lap I was running, certainly gave me a bit of a lift and kind of gave me that similar vibe. The experience they're trying to create, from what the founders have said, is when you go, you feel like you're an Olympic athlete. Big crowd there, a big atmosphere. The other thing I would say is, from a spectator perspective, I've also done half marathons and marathons, these type of events that people might be a bit more familiar with. When you're doing that, my wife comes to that, she can see me run past once or twice. HYROX, she can watch me almost the entire time, struggling and really dying out there. But you can kind of get in and see each station and watch you run around. So she'll see me, more like 20 times in that one thing versus that once or twice in a running event.
So she's getting her $25 worth is what I'm understanding.
Look, I shouted her ticket this time, but I'm not sure whether it was worth $25 to watch me melt out there doing wall balls, but hopefully she enjoyed it. I'm not sure.
Well, while we are talking about money, there are a few avenues that HYROX generates revenue. One of them is, like we just mentioned, spectator tickets. It's also competition tickets. How much did you have to spend to compete on the weekend?
So I spent about $250, but that was without add-ons. There was things like I paid for racing in the same heat as a mate of mine, paid for photos, spectator tickets, etc. Not to mention the fact I'm actually in Brisbane, so I traveled down for the event and probably spent, the best part of a couple of $1,000s competing at the weekend. I know of people going overseas to do these events, flying to Singapore and Seoul and these places to compete. So it's not just limited to that. I think if we also look at the bigger picture, I did some rough numbers on Sydney on the weekend. I think it might have been between $4 and $5 million in revenue just for competitor tickets, not to mention spectator tickets, those other add-ons I'm talking about like photos and merch and these sort of things. So I know going back a few years, they pulled in something like 80 million euros, so maybe 120 odd million Australian dollars from these sort of things. And, given it's now doubled, I think that's increased exponentially in the last few years.
HYROX itself is marketing itself as a sport for everybody, a competition for everybody, and almost like a lifestyle for everybody if we take it to that extreme. Over the weekend, we did see a girl collapse while racing in Sydney, and earlier in the year, we had reports of a man suffering a heart attack in the UK. In light of those very, very limited instances, do you agree that it is a sport for everybody?
Yes, I think it's a sport for everyone and it's quite accessible. Those instances you're talking about, are quite concerning. I'd also say I've competed in running events, as simple as like a Bridge to Brisbane, which is a typical fun run. And I have unfortunately seen, health incidences, those as well. So I don't think it's just maybe a HYROX issue, let's say. In terms of the accessibility side of things, I saw a lot of camaraderie there on the weekend. I saw people as I was running past struggling and people patting them on the back and saying, come on, mate, let's lift, like trying to lift other competitors and run. And that was my experience. They've also got an adaptive sort of approach where you've got, I'm not sure of the right term here, but athletes who don't have full ability, so they might be, limited by, say, a limb or something like that. And they've got adaptive kind of programs that people compete in. And honestly, watching some of those videos is just super, super impressive. Speaking of London, I know you mentioned there, I think it was there where I saw a video of a guy who only had one leg and he's walking around on crutches and doing the entire 8Ks on crutches and then going and competing in the events. That stuff is so, so impressive. So back to your point, is it inclusive? I've certainly experienced that, but maybe that's easy for me to say as a straight white male. It might be different for other people. I'm not sure.
What do you think HYROX's popularity says about where we're at culturally with fitness and performance? Do you think it's about health, or do you think it's slowly slipping into a little bit of status? And essentially, it's a really good Insta-op. It's a really good photo opportunity to share with the world.
What I'd say is I did some quick research yesterday, and if we look at the government's minimum health requirements or exercise requirements, the amount of people meeting those over the last 10 years has gone up by about 50%. So what that shows is people are exercising a lot more than what they were about 10 years ago. So if we look at that through a broad lens and then go, people might be exercising more and now wanting a goal, this is where it's sort of filling that void. In terms of that, influencer, clout, etc., there's definitely an element of that. What I'd say is I actually think it's a smaller percentage of the community than what people might see. I saw even, a mother and daughter competing at the World Championships. There was a couple that were over 70, in their 70s competing this and they completed it in 2 hours. So I think it's probably a bit bigger picture than just that, influencer kind of feed we might get through Instagram or TikTok.
Oh, I love it. All right, Joe, is there a HYROX race you are preparing for that our briefers need to sit there and send you messages of good luck?
Look, I've actually got a little one on the way in a few months' time. So I think that's going to hinder my training a little bit. But I'm hoping sort of Brisbane next year, so it's around March or April. If anyone wants to keep an eye out, they can see a really, really mid-time when I compete next.
Perfect, Joe. Thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
No worries.
That was Joseph Ogilvie speaking with me there. And that is it for this episode of The Briefing. Don't forget, we'll be back in your feeds this afternoon with another episode hosted by Natasha Belling. And don't forget, tomorrow is the Weekend Briefing hosted by our very own Antoinette Latouche. And of course, Tara Cassidy and I will be back in your ears Monday morning for another dose of headlines and an interesting deep dive. But until then, I'm Chris Spyrou. See you next time.